Hello.
It's hello.
Hello. Hello?
Hello there.
Welcome back to the Space Gulag. Today we're back with part 2 of 3. Before we begin this video, special thanks to our patrons, voice actors, and everyone else a part of my team. What a chance to win a free lightsaber in the next giveaway. Watch to the end of the video, I'll tell you exactly how you can win. Don't pay attention to the scammer in the comments, that's not me, YouTube won't take care of it. Our story continues in hyperspace. Yoda sat quietly in the cockpit of the shuttle. Lord Athema rested her eyes in the seat next to him, as he thought about what he had just done. Yoda looked at hyperspace coming towards him. Was the execution of the Utt-Terund worth it? They were essentially defenseless. Yoda hadn't had a cruel master before. Strud and the two before him hadn't taught him the true nature of the dark side. Of course, Yoda and Athema were still figuring it out, especially the way that came before them when Bane was a true Dark Lord of the Sith. Yoda just couldn't understand. He got that the Jedi were the moral enemies of the Sith, and Yoda had no issue with using the dark side, harnessing it for its power, but the Utt-Terund weren't Jedi. They were a bunch of priests. They had no real impact against the Sith or what they were trying to accomplish. Yoda wasn't sure if he was overwhelmed or if it was just overanalyzing the situation. He couldn't deny the fact that it felt good to massacre those who were inferior to him, but something just felt pathetic. Like there wasn't any competition to it. Yoda looked back to his master and almost fell out of his seat. Her yellow eyes were staring into his soul. Athema asked Yoda why he was questioning what they did on Andrillion. Yoda hesitated. He felt like it was a trap question, though on the contrary, it was out of curiosity. Yoda admitted that he felt that the Utt-Terund weren't real adversaries. She smiled, snug in her evil robes as she looked at Yoda, telling him that it was the true intention of the Sith to show their power. Those around the galaxy would need to learn to respect the Sith and the power that they would hold so dear to them. Athema leaned back in her seat with an almost glum smile on her face as she told Yoda that it was her most important intention to ensure Yoda would be able to experience that. Yoda questioned her as she told him that she knew she would never see the day that the Sith took over the galaxy. That day would come during his life, and she was content knowing that. This almost immediately broke Yoda's heart. Yeah, the way of the Sith, but his attachment to his master was very, very important to him, and he knew because of his species' lifespan that he would outlive her, but the fact that she was working so hard for a future that she would never see was not only sad, but it was inspiring in a way. Sure, it could be seen as a moment of weakness within a Sith Lord, but it could also show Yoda the importance of their way of life, and how it meant so much to them. Athema smiled as she told Yoda that there wasn't anything for him to worry about. The most important leg of his training would begin when they arrived on Korriban. From there, they would reinstate the most powerful regime of the Sith. Athema turned around and closed her eyes again, as she meditated for a moment on the small conversation she just had with her apprentice. She wanted to instill the path for Yoda to succeed into his mind. She wanted to ensure that he could enjoy the power that he deserved, and this gave her a certain level of pressure, the pressure to burn herself out and work to the bone so that her apprentice could enjoy a life she could only dream of. But in a way, she was perfectly fine with that, because her lineage would extend through her student. Hours later, the shuttle would land on Korriban. The planet was dusty and currently dark, shrouded in the night. Athema and Yoda walked out to the front of the temple and took in the sight they saw. It was magnificent. A huge temple filled with information. It would be the perfect location for a training to continue. There was so much history on Korriban, and the dark side flowed through the planet itself. For Athema and Yoda, it would provide them perfect cover to begin working on their plan for the dark side to take over the galaxy. The two of them walked into the temple. Everything about the temple was different, and it was much larger than the one on Krayus 2. It made sense why this was a home world of the Sith. The towering pillars filled the halls. Some of them were broken and fell apart. For the most part, the temple was in good shape. Athema suggested that they split up so that they could cover more ground again, and so they did. This temple on Korriban was so much larger, it couldn't even be compared to the one on Krayus 2. This made the two Sith wonder if the temples on Malachor and Exegol were any larger than the one here on Korriban. Athema voyaged down into the depths of the temple, searching into the darkest places across this massive landscape. Athema was able to find the burial grounds. There were names she recognized, but many she'd never heard before. This was what she was searching for, though. When she studied under Bane, it was under this place that she was going to start her next leg of her journey. In the tombs, she would find artifacts and be able to access the power of the dark side in a much more concrete way. From these tombs, she would be able to use these artifacts of the greatest Sith the galaxy had ever seen to harvest her own power from it, and then teach that to Yoda. Yoda, on the other hand, would take notice of the great interior, finding the throne room for the Sith Lord, and he also found a room for what seemed to be spells within an altar in the middle. Yoda was more or less excited to bring to his master the throne room. Just a little something she could enjoy, since she wouldn't, in her words, live to see the downfall of the Jedi. Several hours later, they would reconvene in the middle of the temple by happenstance, to which they would both tell each other what they found. There was no library here. It seemed as if Korriban didn't have any Sith holocrons. Regardless, Athema informed Yoda that the next step of his training would begin. Yoda, on the other hand, showed his master the throne room, as he expressed how much he thought she should have it. Athema knelt down and placed her hand on Yoda's shoulder. She looked over and pointed at the throne. She told Yoda that while she was the Sith Lord and his master, that throne wouldn't be for her. That throne would be for the Sith Lord that defeated the Jedi. That would be Yoda's throne, and until then, she would teach him everything he needed to know so that the throne would become his. Yoda understood, and then for the next 5 decades, Yoda and Athema would become the most powerful Sith since Malgus, or the Sith Triumvirate. Their journeys would take them from Korriban to Malachor and to Exegol. On Exegol, the two of them would discover the ancient Sith Eternal, a group of loyalists that believed in the way of the Sith, similar to the worshippers from Kratos 2. The two Sith Lords had no interactions with the Jedi in the last 50 years, but they did come up with a plan they believed should work. Lord Athena was in her 70s, rapidly approaching her 80s. The dark side made her powerful as an older woman, and she was still strong, but noticeably weaker overall. She no longer had the energy of her younger days, and her apprentice was able to outdo her in every aspect other than the Force itself. It was a narrow margin, but just enough, though there was no intention from Yoda to follow the traditional method of killing off his own master, taking on the role of Sith Lord for himself. By this point, the plan that Athema helped Yoda conjure up was in the works. While Athema spent most of her time on Kratos 2, mostly tormenting the Sisters of Darkness for her own enjoyment, Yoda was out scouting out the galaxy, looking for the 12 Force users that would eventually fill the Order of 13. Yoda and Athema decided against just having 2 members, noting that the 3 masters before Athema had broken the rule of 2. While technically Yoda wasn't an apprentice, it was technically of a technicality, and honestly, no one really had time for that. So Athema and Yoda set up Yoda to begin his Order of 13. He'd be searching for Force users, though the only issue is that they were often claimed by the Jedi weeks before Yoda could catch up to the scent. Their decision to leave the rule of 2 was just a theory. Yoda was growing into something so much more incredible than his own master. The intended journey was becoming complete, and at 300 years old, it would only be a matter of time before Yoda became the great Sith Lord. Yoda was on the trail, and as soon as he found the first child, he carried on a hot streak, finding 7 more children of the Force. Within a month and a half, all of these children would be brought back to Kratos 2 to be with their Grand Master. Athema would take care of the children until Yoda had all of his students. Athema didn't have much to do. She had small incubators to take care of them when she was out torturing the Sisters of Darkness for her own amusement, but for the most part she did take care of them. It would take the rest of the year for Yoda to find the other 5 children of the Force. None of them had any names, so he decided that he would have to name them with his master. There were 4 girls and 8 boys. Their names would become Jur, Kern, Skor, Mirren, Pente, Fildic, Zol, and Justith. And for the girls, Chax, Armor, Fear, and Kiad. Yoda was excited about the future of training these young minds, and he rejoiced in the thought of training his own students. When he returned with all of his students, he noticed something off about his master, though. She was acting a bit differently. Not in a cruel or rude way, she was just weak. She resorted to staying away and out of sight most of the time. She didn't want to be seen as weak, so she avoided her student. Yoda would try to communicate with her, but there was nothing from her side communicating back. It was more or less that she wanted Yoda to remember who she was when she first training him. He never saw this as an insult, though. She, by this point, had taught him everything he knew, and she herself was very impactful on his life. One day, Yoda felt a disturbance, and he made his way around the temple to find a secret room that she showed them when they returned the Crais II originally. Yoda ran in as he found Athema on the ground. She was looking up at the ceiling, and she looked over to her apprentice. She looked so sad and disappointed, and so Yoda got to her as he asked what was wrong with her. Athema told Yoda that she never wanted him to see her like this. She was always meant to be a powerful master until a peaceful death in her sleep, but this was embarrassing. Yoda got down next to her and held her hand as she told him that the legacy of the Sith now belonged to him. Yoda didn't want to let go, but it wasn't going to change. It was his moment to take control of the Sith and to become the Sith Lord. Athema told Yoda to carry on the dream and be everything that the Sith needed, because the future belonged to him. A small smile faded across her face as she faded away and fell lightly back onto the ground. Yoda's eyes closed as he held her hands for a couple of minutes, taking in everything that had just happened. He knew he owed it to her to construct her a great tomb. She was the beginning of the new Sith, and she would be the motivation for Yoda to be the Sith Lord she believed he could become. Yoda used the Sisters of Darkness to construct a tomb for his master and prepare a ceremony to bound the body of his master to the tomb, encasing it with a Sith curse that would corrupt any individual who broke through the tomb or tried to mess with it. At the same time, Yoda would begin to theorize on how he would train his students. This training process would be very important to him. He had to make sure that these students grew up believing in the ways of the Sith without any hesitation. They would follow the same exact lessons that Athema taught him throughout the years. Yoda, after the death of Athema, was the most powerful Sith in the galaxy, and his ceiling was still not reached. Yoda was around the same power as Athema, but he still had much higher a ceiling than she had. Athema, on the other hand, was so powerful because she was able to build up to her ceiling. Yoda still had much more to go. Yoda planned out everything he needed, but the truth is, he would feel extremely lonely for the next couple of years. Sure, he was able to interact with the Sisters of Darkness and the Sith Eternal, but there was no one like his master, and for the first couple years, the 12 children he brought back to Crais II, he felt alone with as well. Sure, he had his students, but they were just children. They weren't really functioning individuals, and they couldn't be taught until they could actually comprehend anything. So Yoda locked himself away and planned lessons out, and when the time came, he rejoiced in the functionality of his students. But just because they were kids, it didn't mean they got an easy pass. Yoda would train the students harsher than Athema was ever with him. Yoda had no intention of dragging his feet. All he wanted to do was ensure that his students grew into the Sith apprentices he wanted. Their growth would start slow, but when the kids reached their preteens, they began to accelerate. All the students were relatively close with one another. They saw each other essentially like siblings. Even though none of them were related, they called each other brothers and sisters. This allowed them to have a more aggressive growth pattern. Their growth was inspired by their teachers' tough behavior. The students fell deep into the dark side, and when they reached their teenage years, they began to go off-world from Crais II and travel to Exegol and Korriban. The students naturally fell into their roles as Lord Yoda's apprentices. It was only a matter of time and how long it would take for them to continue to impress him. As they trained, they all adopted aggressive forms of lightsaber combat. Each of the 12 had their own respective styles that varied within the form of combat they understood. Though Yoda immediately noticed an issue. None of these students had a true ceiling within the Force. Yes, they would make decent apprentices, but for the time being, the biggest issue is that none of them could ever equate to his own power, let alone the power of his master that came before him. Yoda still tried to teach these students to grow into their power sufficiently. This would prove to be effective as the 12 members turned into the age of their early 20s. While the 13 were out on a trip to a local mid-rim planet to scourge the population, it was great fun until 8 people rose from the rubble. The Sith were obviously not intimidated by this behavior, as they all twirled their lightsabers and stepped forward to kill them. Then all of a sudden, the 8 people ignited their lightsabers. The weird thing is that they weren't dressed as Jedi, but they were dressed as regular citizens with lightsabers. What the Sith didn't know is that these Jedi were also known as the Lost 14. They were 8 of 14 different Jedi Masters that had abandoned the Jedi Order. The Sith didn't know that, and they cockily jumped into battle against the former Jedi. The 12 students of Yoda moved in at an impressive speed. They were still so young, but they had the potential to take the fight right to these Jedi. as they assumed they were. The Sith engaged under the fire of the town they burnt to the ground. Their crimson blades clashed with blue and green as their confidence dissipated under the control and poise of 8 Jedi Masters. Lord Yoda bounced around between 3 of the Jedi Masters who cornered him. As for his students, they tried to hold their own, but Darth Jur and Kern, the closest of the bunch, stood side by side as a single Jedi Master whipped around them, grabbing one of their wrists and cutting through them without remorse as he pulled Jur's blade around and shoved it into Kern's chest. Chax and Binta stood side by side as they faced down another Jedi Master. Their action was successful as they pressed hard against the former Jedi, and then another one of them came around and caught them by surprise, as the 2 of them were cut down instantaneously by the 2 Jedi. Yoda watched 4 of his students die as he shot lightning into the throat of one of the 3 Jedi around him, as he leapt up onto another's shoulders and slit his throat. Yoda jumped down and cut into the woman whose throat was struck with lightning. Yoda turned around as he faced down the last Jedi Master in his corner, as Darth Josieth, Phildick, and Amro fell lifeless to the ground. Yoda's anger rose. He had 12 students when he came here, and now only 5 remained. Yoda leapt around and used the Force to snap the back of the Jedi in front of him, before running forward and dragging his blade through the ground and through the body of the Jedi that laid there helpless. Yoda turned to see 5 Jedi and 5 of his apprentices facing off. Yoda could see that they were scared. They had each lost their brothers and sisters, and they were terrified. Yoda leapt in front of them as he assured them that they would come out victorious. Yoda rallied his students as they felt confidence grow, and their feelings of success tripled. Yoda leapt in front of them as Zul and Kiad followed their master. Fear and Skor and Mirren stayed close behind, pulling up the rear. Yoda was able to separate the 3 Jedi Masters from the main group, all 3 of them recognizing that Yoda was the leader. The other 2 took on the remaining 5 with extremely high confidences. The Jedi lunged into attack, and the Sith apprentices fell back in almost complete terror. In the front was Zul and Kiad as they pushed back. Führer moved up to help out her sister as Mirren joined his brother. Skor began to backpedal in fear, afraid of the Jedi and the power that they possessed. Yoda jumped in between the 3 Jedi, leaping up and down as he harnessed the true power of the dark side, shooting lightning out at the 3 Jedi and then lunging at them. Their fear was shown in their facial expressions. Behind him, Zul and Mirren were making a push on the Jedi Master as Führer and Kiad struggled a bit. They called out to Skor, who ran forward, seeing that his sisters were in need of assistance. Yoda cut down 2 of the 3 Jedi as Führer, Skor, and Kiad were able to kill their Jedi Master. Yoda turned back as he threw the blade forward, and then using an ancient technique, ignited the 2 blades of the fallen Jedi and lifted them up into the air, using the Force to manipulate the blades in the lightsaber combat. The Jedi dodged the thrown lightsaber as he ducked around and swung at the 2 blades floating before him. Yoda twisted around as he pushed both blades against the Jedi Master. He stumbled, and then Yoda pulled his own blade out and cut through him. Behind him, 2 Sith were able to cut down the final Jedi. Yoda turned around and sheathed his blade as he looked at his students. Yoda was disappointed. They outnumbered the Jedi, and yet they suffered just as many deaths. Yoda still not processing that those who they were fighting were not Jedi. They were not regular Jedi Knights either. They were experienced masters who abandoned the Order, opening them up to the full range of the Force, making them stronger than any average Jedi Master. Yoda didn't say a word because, before he could say anything, Lord Mirren stepped forward and yelled at his master. Yoda looked at him as if he lost his mind. Mirren accused Yoda of not defending them. Yoda shot back, telling him that he was trained to defend himself with the power of the dark side. The failure of the other students wasn't a reflection of his own teachings. Instead, it was a reflection of their own inability to be the apprentices they should have been. It was a failure to be better. Then Zul stepped forward, taking the side of Mirren. Shortly after, Führer, Kiad, and Skor took the side of their fellow brothers and sisters, standing up to their Sith Lord, Master. Lord Yoda didn't take this too seriously as he tried to calm them down, and then from the debate came the sound of a lightsaber ignited from Zul, as he told Yoda that this would be him becoming replaced. Yoda didn't hesitate. This was a threat. His students failed him, and now their betrayal would be dealt with. The travesty of this is that the fact that Yoda wished he would have the same relationship with these students as he did with his master, and through all of it, it made him realize the truth about the rule of 2. This was the exact reason the Rule of Two was created by Lord Bane. Its purpose was to serve the longevity of the Sith. Had the Sith kept the same relationships of Athema and Yoda, it would have been much different, but that was clearly not the case with these students. The other four ignited their lightsabers, and then they all rushed their master. Yoda stepped back as he took a deep breath. He leapt through the middle of them, cutting off Score's legs as he cried out in pain. The other four of them turned. Yoda moved like a blur. He jumped up as he clung on to Kiad as she panicked. Yoda slit her throat, and then jumped over and cut through Zul. Yoda shot lightning through Mirren and then threw his lightsaber at Firir. She was able to deflect it, and then Yoda moved at her with the intense speed, splashing up and down as she dropped to the ground dead. Yoda turned to Score, his last apprentice, still alive. Score looked at his master and apologized. He felt so sorry for what he'd done, begging his master to be kind to him. Yoda shook his head with disappointment. He looked at Score and told him that there was no mercy. Yoda jabbed his blade through Score's face and turned around. The village was burnt to the ground. 8 Jedi were killed, and 12 of his students were dead. Yoda felt great disappointment. He was meant to be the pathway to victory for the Sith. He was meant to accomplish the dream his master could never see. And yet all of his students failed him, and failed her, and he didn't know if he could ever train another because of it. Maybe it was a drastic feeling, but he needed some time away from teaching. 20 years since his master died, and 20 years since he began teaching a class of dead students, traitors to the ways of the Sith. Yoda knew that from here on out, he'd be sticking to the Rule of Two. It was just a matter of finding the right Sith Lord that would fit his new plan. Yoda would decide upon what to do to empower the Sith. As the years picked up, turning into decades and shortly thereafter turning into centuries, Yoda would have new apprentices and students, none of them being anywhere close to his power, all of them falling short of living a successful life. And the very few of them that ever challenged him faced the same fate as the 5 students who died in the Mid-Rim. Yoda was approaching his 600s, still in fantastic shape, when he traveled deep into the Outer Rim. His student had recently tried to overthrow him, a 40-year-old Rodian Sith Lord by the name of Darth Atrun. His failure was easily predictable, and it didn't take much. Yoda didn't have to use many efforts to kill him, though Lord Athrun tried to kill him in his sleep. Yoda was much wiser than Athrun and never gave him a chance. Yoda's voyage into the Outer Rim led him to a planet of Nal Hutta. He naturally avoided the Hutt home world because the Hutts quite frankly disgusted him. They were large slugs that had a nasty behavior of being overzealous and pompous. Sure, they were climb lords, but they came across like politicians, which was rather repugnant. Regardless, Yoda found his way in front of the Hutt Council, and it led to a negotiation. Being that the High Republic had a tight grip on the Mid-Rim and the Outer Rim, it'd be challenging, but the Crime Lords had already been planning for the downfall of the Republic systems. The Crime Lords could sneak into the Outer Rim with more strength than the High Republic, and it would give up some of his own territory. One of the planets Yoda had in mind was Tatooine. At the moment, it was a shimmering example of pride in the High Republic. The glimmering cities of Mos Espa and Mos Eisley were known galaxy-wide for being the modern example of beauty, and it would be a great place for the Hutts to interject themselves into Tatooine and watch the High Republic give Tatooine and some of the surrounding worlds up in the name of peace. The Jedi wouldn't do anything because they were under the whim of the Senate. 800 years without the Sith, and there was no reason for them to ever interject. The Hutts were certainly skeptical, but they would come to find that Yoda knew more than his small head would suggest. Maybe the Hutts should stop judging books by their covers. Yoda watched as the High Republic began to back off its territory in the Outer Rim. This didn't happen immediately, but it was a gradual process that would slowly cross over through 2 centuries. The High Republic would also fade out of power. The Jedi would slowly recede away from the Outer Rim. Yoda's plans would be amplified with a visit to Zygeria and bringing out the most brutal slavers the galaxy had ever seen. Yoda may have been small, but his impact on the Crime Lords exponentially impacted the galaxy that would inherit his soon-to-come plans. Though after not having a student for almost 200 years, he would return to Kratos II and visit his master's room. He hadn't been in it before. He was just looking for answers, maybe something to give him an extra guidance on his mission to find a new apprentice. Yoda then found something that might be of interest. It was coordinates to a blue and green globe in the Mid-Rim. Yoda would take this piece of information and begin his scavenger hunt to the planet of Naboo. Yoda's trail would lead him to the public records of which he would find the last name of his master entrenched in the planet's history. Nowadays, it was a proud house with a couple of kids. and the youngest one of them having been born only 8 years beforehand. This house had a strong political weight on Naboo. Yoda was wondering why she never mentioned this to him. Maybe she would have told him before she died, but she never got the chance because of the sudden death that she had. Yoda tracked the records to a great house, though there was something so dark about it. Lord Yoda walked in and looked around. There were dead people scattered throughout the entire house, and in the middle, Yoda looked at the ancient descendant of Lord Athema, the youngest member of the house, a boy named Sheev Palpatine. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of part 2 of 3. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Jonathan, Pimp Daddy Bane, Icy Raptor, Apollo, Mad Mana Studios, Anakin003, and Gord for supporting the channel. This is Tales like the video. I got other videos coming out, including part 3 and this video right here. If you want to see what else, let me know in the comments. Want to do the crossovers, check out the Twitch, community Discord, and Patreon to support me in other ways. And for the free lightsaber, don't listen to the comments. It's not me. I would never give something out on those. I announce all the winners in the videos. Go down below. There's a doc. Click on the doc. You write your name on the doc, and that's it. I will announce 3 winners for our giveaway for 3 different lightsabers. When we hit 50,000 subscribers, we're 8,000 away, so let's keep the train rolling. Let's try and hit it before the end of 2022. That is the main goal. Try and hit 50 before the end of 22, so we can give them all away for Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever you believe in. So I don't really have much to talk about with this story. It's part 2. Obviously, that reveal at the end is kind of the build. I'm really excited. The entire intention for this is to have characters that could literally fit within the lore, but not take away from it, right? So a character that can fit within the lore, but you just don't know they exist. And that's kind of what I like to do. I like to interject characters and not make them something that would literally change galactic events, something that literally could exist, because there's a gap between Bane and Xenoboss or Tenenboss or whatever the name is of Plagueis' master, and that was the entire intention. Athema is supposed to be a Sith, Strahd is supposed to be a Sith that could have existed, but we just don't know they exist, right? And you never know. The way Star Wars works with lineages, you never know that Palpatine could have a great lineage of being a Sith Lord. Anyways, I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, may the Force be with you.